The hushed clink of champagne flutes cut through the humid Denver night. Hank, hidden by a potted palm, watched his wife, Betty Jo, leaning close to her boss, Mitch. "I need him gone by August," she whispered, a chilling urgency in her voice. A soft, knowing laugh left Mitch's lips. "Don't worry about it, Betty Jo. He'll never know what hit him." The words settled in Hank's chest like shards of glass. Hank steps onto the darkened patio of the Langford Hotel during Meridian Investments' annual gala, needing a breather. He overhears his wife, Betty Jo, whisper urgently to her boss, Mitch, "I need him gone by August." Betty Jo mentions the money and everything we've done, her voice low and tense. Mitch, a sleek executive type, reassures her with a soft laugh. "Don't worry about it, Betty Jo. He'll never know what hit him." They clink glasses. Hank's heart starts to hammer against his ribs, frozen in the shadows. Hank reflects on his own life, a 34-year-old average real estate agent in Denver. Nothing special. He recalls meeting Betty Jo 7 years ago, her ambition and beauty instantly captivating him. Their early years were like a romantic comedy: mountain getaways, surprise flowers, inside jokes. Hank was busy building his reputation, working long hours, which Betty Jo seemed to support. A chilling thought strikes him. Maybe she was relieved by his absence, giving her room for a double life. He remembers Dale and Brenda expressing concern about Betty Jo at Christmas, saying she seemed different. Hank brushed off the warning signs: late meetings, phone protection, Mitch's name popping up constantly. He trusted her completely, even when she methodically took control of all their finances, handling investments. At the gala, Hank felt damn proud of Betty Jo, completely oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding. The warm air on the Langford Hotel patio offered little relief from the stifling heat of the Meridian Investments annual gala. Inside, the drone of polite conversation and the tinkling of ice filled the ballroom. Hank had slipped out for a moment, needing a breath of something other than stale perfume and ambition. He adjusted his tie, the knot feeling suddenly too tight. The shadows offered a temporary shield from the glittering facade of success. That's when he heard it, Betty Jo's voice, distinct even in a whisper laced with an urgency Hank had rarely heard before. "I need him gone by August." The words hung in the air, pulling him taut. He instinctively pressed himself further into the darkness beside a large clay planter filled with wilting petunias. Her back was to him, her posture rigid, elegant in a dress he'd picked out himself. Across from her, Mitch, his boss at Meridian, leaned against the stone railing, a smirk playing on his lips. "The money," Betty Jo continued, her voice even lower, "and everything we've done. We can't risk it now." The light from the ballroom windows caught the side of Mitch's face, highlighting the sharp angles. He was always immaculately dressed, every hair in place, a man who seemed to have no rough edges. He chuckled softly, a sound that held no warmth. "Don't worry about it, Betty Jo. He'll never know what hit him." A small, almost imperceptible clink followed, the sound of their champagne flutes touching. Hank's heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to break through his tailored shirt. He felt an icy grip on his chest, a paralysis that rooted him to the spot. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish. He was 34, an average real estate agent in Denver. Nothing special. He moved properties, mostly suburban homes and small commercial leases. He wasn't a mover and a shaker, not like the men who populated these galas, the ones with expensive watches and even more expensive smiles. He had a decent income, a comfortable life, and a wife who, until this moment, he believed loved him. He'd met Betty Jo 7 years ago at an open house he was hosting, a sprawling bungalow with an overgrown yard. She'd walked in, all sharp intelligence and quiet ambition, her beauty instantly captivating him. She was an analyst then, fresh out of business school, and she had seen something in him, or so he'd thought. Their early years had felt like a romantic comedy, full of spontaneous mountain getaways, surprise bouquets left on her desk, and inside jokes that only they understood. He remembered evenings spent planning their future, the vague, shimmering shape of it, full of promise. Hank had poured himself into his work, building his reputation, working long hours to establish his name in a competitive market. Betty Jo had always seemed supportive, understanding his need to put in the time. Go get him, honey, she'd say, waving him off in the mornings. He'd mistaken her encouragement for solidarity. A chilling thought, cold as the champagne in Mitch's hand, struck him. Maybe she was relieved by his absence, his dedication to his career creating the perfect cover for a double life. The thought felt like a physical blow. He remembered a Christmas party last year, his friends Dale and Brenda, both good, honest people, pulling him aside. Betty Jo seems different, Hank, Brenda had said, her brow furrowed with concern. A little too polished, maybe. Dale had nodded, adding, yeah, she's always on her phone, like she's got secrets. Hank had laughed it off, dismissing it as holiday stress, their well-meaning but misguided observations. He'd brushed off the late meetings, the way Betty Jo guarded her phone, the increasingly frequent appearance of Mitch's name in their conversations. It was business, he'd told himself, just business. He had trusted her, completely. He'd even let her methodically take control of all their finances, handling investments, managing their savings. You're so good with numbers, honey, he'd told her. Better than me. She'd smiled, a quick, efficient smile, and taken the reins. He hadn't questioned it. Why would he? He loved her. Just an hour ago, he'd stood in the ballroom watching her laugh with colleagues, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, feeling a damn proud satisfaction. She was his wife, his beautiful, ambitious wife, the woman he'd built a life with. He had been completely oblivious, then to the conspiracy unfolding just yards away, to the plans being made for him, the man who would never know what hit him. Hank recalls the elegant rooftop terrace of the Langford, string lights and jazz, a perfect facade. He sought quiet by the rooftop garden, partially hidden by a large planter. Betty Jo and Mitch moved to a secluded corner, thinking they were alone. Mitch outlined their timeline. The San Diego conference is perfect timing. Transfer the final amount that Friday. Betty Jo, with a note of worry, asked, what if he comes back early? Mitch dismissed her concern. He won't. You said he always stays for the networking events on Sunday. The chilling follow-up. By the time he's back, it'll be too late. The Aspen property will be signed over. Accounts emptied. Hank's mind reeled. The Aspen property was their dream, their retirement plan, years of saving. Betty Jo then inquired about Sandra, later identified as Doris, the attorney. Mitch confirmed Doris was the best divorce attorney in Colorado. Clean break. He added, minimal assets for him to claim. By the time he figures out what happened, we'll be sipping cocktails in Bali. Hank nearly dropped his glass. Divorce. Bali. His mind couldn't process the words. He watched Mitch's hand intimately rest on Betty Jo's lower back, the soft kiss on her neck. His stomach lurched. He ducked behind the planter, bumping into a waiter as he fled. The Langford Hotel's rooftop terrace usually felt like a secret garden, a world away from the busy Denver streets below. Tonight, string lights glowed softly, casting a romantic haze over the potted ferns and iron-wrought tables. A live jazz trio played a smooth, melancholic tune, the saxophone weeping into the night. It was a perfect facade, he realized now, for a perfectly ugly truth. Hank had retreated further from the main gathering, drawn to a quiet corner, where a large cylindrical planter filled with drooping purple flowers offered a bit of concealment. He needed to be alone to make sense of Betty Jo's words. I need him gone by August. His mind was still trying to process them, running them over and over like a broken record. Betty Jo and Mitch, seemingly oblivious to his presence, moved to a more secluded spot just a few feet from where Hank stood, shielded by the planter's broad leaves. They thought they were alone. Mitch's voice was a low murmur, confident and controlled. The San Diego conference is perfect timing for us, Betty Jo. You leave Thursday, he leaves Friday. We'll transfer the final amount that Friday evening once his flight is in the air. Betty Jo, for the first time, sounded a flicker of worry. What if he comes back early? Her voice was tight, barely audible above the jazz. Mitch laughed, a soft, dismissive sound that grated on Hank's ears. He won't. You said he always stays for the networking events on Sunday. Plays the good little real estate agent, building contacts. It's his routine. Mitch's words hung in the air, cold and precise. Hank felt a fresh wave of nausea. His predictable nature, the very habits he thought made him reliable, were being weaponized against him. By the time he's back, Mitch continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, it'll be too late. The Aspen property will be signed over. Accounts emptied. We'll have everything. The Aspen property. Hank felt a cold dread spread through his chest, chilling him to the bone. It wasn't just a piece of land, it was their dream, their retirement plan. Years of scrimping, of delayed gratification, of shared hopes for a small cabin by the lake. Every extra commission, every penny saved, had gone into that dream. They'd spent weekends driving up, just looking at the land, picturing the future. Hank's mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of what he was hearing. The Aspen property, their future, was being signed over. Betty Jo paused, then brought up another name. What about Sandra? Is she ready? Mitch nodded, his head catching the soft light. Doris, actually. Sandra's just a cover name we used earlier. Doris is the best divorce attorney in Colorado. She guarantees a clean break, minimal assets for him to claim. His eyes glittered with a predatory glee. By the time he figures out what happened, we'll be sipping cocktails in Bali. Divorce. Bali. The words echoed in Hank's ears, disorienting him. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with the glass of sparkling water he still held, nearly dropping it onto the flagstones. Divorce? Betty Jo wanted a divorce? And she was planning it with Mitch, meticulously, down to the last penny, while he was away? Bailey. The exotic destination sounded like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to his own planned weekend in Denver, probably sorting through client files. Then Mitch's hand moved, settling intimately on Betty Jo's lower back. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her neck, just below her ear. It was a casual gesture, one that spoke of routine intimacy, not a furtive, stolen moment. It solidified everything, confirming a betrayal that went far beyond mere financial maneuvering. This wasn't just a business scheme. It was a full-blown affair, long-standing and deeply calculated. Hank's stomach lurched, a violent twist that sent bile rising in his throat. He had to get out. He instinctively ducked further behind the planter, stumbling slightly as he turned. His shoulder bumped hard against a passing waiter, sending a tray of empty champagne flutes clattering to the ground. "Oh, sorry," he mumbled, not looking back, his voice thick with a sudden overwhelming urge to flee, to disappear from this elegant, horrifying scene. He pushed through the crowd, a man suddenly invisible, his world collapsing around him. The remainder of the gala was a blur of noise and faces. Hank could only watch Betty Jo and Mitch's familiar interactions. He remembered Betty Jo's suggestions. Attend the San Diego conference. Keep financial documents in her office. Let her manage investments. He felt like a complete idiot, a puppet in his own home. Back home, Betty Jo kicked off her heels, sighing contentedly on the couch, oblivious to Hank's inner turmoil. Hank feigned normalcy, commending her. Betty Jo's eyes lit up. Mitch has been amazing. He's pushing for my promotion. She then headed upstairs to shower, asking, "Coming to bed soon?" Once he heard the water running, Hank went to her laptop, always left on the kitchen counter. He used their anniversary as the password. Too easy, he thought, his heart sinking. He found months of correspondence between Betty Jo and Mitch, a mix of work and intimate messages. Then he found it, an email from 3 weeks ago, subject, "Next steps, we need to accelerate the timeline." The email confirmed, "The Cayman account is ready. Hank's name isn't on anything. August is perfect." It detailed transferring everything, filing paperwork, and listing the house while he was in San Diego. Hank found SL, Doris, in Betty Jo's calendar just 2 days prior. He checked their joint accounts, still untouched, then Betty Jo's personal account. He discovered large periodic transfers to an unknown account, draining their savings for Aspen. The shower turned off upstairs. Hank quickly closed everything, hands shaking, placing the laptop back. Betty Jo came down in her bathrobe, looking so normal. She kissed his cheek. "You okay? Don't stay up too late. Brunch with my parents tomorrow." The rest of the gala blurred into an oppressive hum of noise and unfamiliar faces. Hank drifted through it, a ghost in his own life, his eyes involuntarily drawn to Betty Jo and Mitch. Their interactions, once unremarkable, now seemed sinister. The way Mitch would subtly place a hand on her arm when they laughed, the shared glance that spoke of a private understanding. He saw it all now, every casual gesture, every hushed conversation, replaying in his mind with a sickening new context. He remembered Betty Jo's calm suggestions over the last few months. You should really go to that San Diego conference, honey. It's a great networking opportunity. Why don't we just keep all our important financial documents in my office? It's more organized there. Let me manage the investments. You know I'm better with numbers. He felt like a complete idiot, a simple-minded puppet in his own home, dancing to a tune he hadn't even recognized. Finally, they were home. Betty Jo kicked off her heels by the front door, sighing a sound of utter contentment as she elapsed onto the living room couch. She picked up a magazine, flipping through it, completely oblivious to the cold, quiet war raging inside him. Hank forced himself to feign normalcy, a tight smile on his face. You really charmed everyone tonight, honey. You were on fire. Betty Jo's eyes lit up, a genuine warmth he suddenly distrusted. Mitch has been amazing. He's really pushing for my promotion. He says I'm indispensable. She smiled again, a triumphant, almost giddy expression. I think it's really going to happen. That's great, Hank managed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. She stood, stretching languidly. Well, I'm exhausted. I'm going to shower. Coming to bed soon? In a bit, he replied, watching her ascend the stairs. Just going to clear my head. As soon as he heard the muffled rush of water from the bathroom upstairs, Hank moved. His hands felt cold, clammy. He walked to the kitchen counter where Betty Jo's sleek laptop always sat, a permanent fixture. He knew the password. He'd helped her set it up years ago. Their anniversary, a date he now realized she held with such casual disregard. Too easy, he thought, the phrase a hollow echo of his own naivety. His heart sank even further, a heavy stone in his chest. The desktop loaded. He navigated to her email, his fingers clumsy on the trackpad. It took only a few clicks to find what he was looking for. Months of correspondence between Betty Jo and Mitch. It started subtly work-related discussions that slowly, insidiously morphed into something else. Intimate messages disguised as strategic planning, veiled compliments, and eventually clear declarations of affection. He scrolled through them, each word a fresh wound. Then he saw it. An email from 3 weeks ago, its subject line stark against the white background. Next steps, we need to accelerate the timeline. His breath caught in his throat. He clicked it open. The email was from Mitch, brief and chillingly precise. The Cayman account is ready. Hank's name isn't on anything, just like we planned. August is perfect. We'll initiate the transfers on Friday the 18th, once you both leave for San Diego. File the divorce paperwork Monday morning. I'll take care of getting the house listed that week. Everything will be in motion by the time he gets back. Hank's vision blurred. Friday the 18th. That was the day he was flying out. He checked her digital calendar. Sure enough, an entry for SL, he now knew it was Doris, the attorney, was marked for 2 days prior, confirming the consultation. He moved to her banking app, his mind a frantic scramble. He checked their joint accounts first. Still untouched, seemingly normal. A cunning distraction. Then he went to Betty Jo's personal account, the one she'd opened for her own career expenses a year ago. It was all there, a series of large, periodic transfers, quietly siphoning funds from their shared savings, the money meant for the Aspen property. The dream, emptied, funneled into an unknown account, likely the one in the Caymans. The shower upstairs stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Hank slammed the laptop shut, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He pushed it back into its usual spot, his breathing shallow. A few minutes later, Betty Jo padded down the stairs in her plush white bathrobe, hair damp, a faint scent of lavender trailing behind her. She looked utterly normal, serene even. She paused beside him, leaning down to press a soft kiss against his cheek. Her lips felt cold. You okay, honey? She murmured, her voice laced with concern, the same voice that had plotted his downfall. Don't stay up too late. Brunch with my parents tomorrow. Hank spent a sleepless night on the couch, the full weight of the betrayal crushing him. Every word, every touch, every lie replayed. He faked a sudden illness to skip brunch with Betty Jo's parents, needing space to think, to breathe. Hank began discreetly researching divorce law in Colorado, asset protection strategies, and the dark reality of financial fraud. He understood he needed legal help, but the thought of revealing Betty Jo's betrayal to a stranger felt like admitting a personal failure. Hank confided in Frank, an older, trusted real estate colleague, vaguely mentioning marital issues and asking for a recommendation for a discreet attorney. Late at night, while Betty Jo slept, Hank started printing key emails and bank statements, saving digital copies to a hidden drive. He observed Betty Jo and Mitch more closely now, the shared glances, the expensive new watch Mitch wore, the increasing late-night phone calls she tried to hide. Hank opened a new personal bank account at a different credit union, quietly transferring a small emergency fund from his own savings into it. He started keeping a detailed, handwritten journal, documenting dates, conversations, and every suspicious action. Hank mentally rehearsed a confrontation, then abandoned it. He needed a plan, not an outburst. A profound sense of grief washed over him, mourning the years he thought were real, the love he believed in. The thought of fighting back felt foreign, but the alternative, losing everything, ignited a cold resolve within him. The couch felt alien beneath him, the floral pattern of the cushions suddenly grotesque. Hank spent the night there, staring at the muted glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The full weight of the betrayal pressed down, suffocating him. Every word from Betty Jo's lips, every intimate touch he'd once cherished, every shared laugh now replayed in his mind as a carefully constructed lie. The memory of Mitch's kiss on her neck felt like a brand. The next morning, Betty Jo's cheerful voice from the kitchen asking about brunch with her parents was almost unbearable. He feigned a sudden, violent stomach bug, clutching his abdomen for emphasis. "Really bad, honey," he managed, his voice raspy. "Don't think I can make it." He watched her face, searching for any flicker of suspicion, but saw only a practiced concern. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, her voice soft. "I'll tell Mom and Dad you're under the weather." He needed space, needed to breathe, needed to think beyond the immediate, crushing pain. Alone in the house, Hank began his education. He sat at his own laptop, the familiar glow of the screen, a stark contrast to the darkness within him. He started with general searches: Colorado divorce law, asset protection strategies in marriage, financial fraud spousal. The results were bleak, a world of legal jargon and cautionary tales. He learned about marital assets, separate property, and the chilling ease with which one spouse could drain a joint account. He understood he needed legal help. That much was clear. But the thought of revealing Betty Jo's meticulously planned betrayal to a stranger felt like admitting a profound personal failure, a public confession of his own stupidity. He remembered Frank, an older colleague in real estate, a man with a quiet demeanor and a sharp mind. Frank had seen his share of mess in the suburban homes they sold. Hank called him, trying to keep his voice level. "Frank, you know anyone good? A lawyer? Nothing specific, just marital issues." Frank's voice was gentle, recognizing the unspoken. "I know a woman, Doris Lang. Very discreet. I'll text you her number." The name Doris hit Hank like a physical blow. The very attorney Mitch and Betty Jo had chosen to strip him bare. The irony was almost comical, if he hadn't felt like shattering. That night, after Betty Jo had drifted off to sleep, her breathing even and calm beside him, Hank moved with a calculated quietness. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her, and went to his small home office. He pulled up Betty Jo's emails and bank statements again, the ones he'd glimpsed the other night. He printed key conversations, the next steps email, the details of the Cayman account. He saved digital copies to a hidden, encrypted drive he'd bought months ago for client files. Every click of the mouse, every whir of the printer, felt like a small act of rebellion. He started watching Betty Jo and Mitch more closely. Now he saw the shared glances across a crowded room, the way Mitch's hand would linger just a moment too long on Betty Jo's arm at the office Christmas party. He noticed the expensive new watch Mitch wore, a sleek silver timepiece that seemed to appear overnight. He noticed Betty Jo's increasing late-night phone calls, always taken in the other room, her voice a hushed whisper. He logged it all mentally, building a silent case. He opened a new personal bank account at a different credit union, one Betty Jo wouldn't know to check. He quietly transferred a small emergency fund from his own meager personal savings, just enough to float by if everything went south immediately. It felt strange, like preparing for a natural disaster, except the disaster was his own life. He also started a detailed handwritten journal, a plain black notebook hidden beneath his mattress. Dates, times, suspicious actions, snippets of conversation. His mind, once so trusting, was now a meticulous, cold machine, documenting every piece of the puzzle. He mentally rehearsed a confrontation, picturing Betty Jo's face, the words he would hurl at her. But then he abandoned it. What good would an outburst do? It would only give them an advantage, alert them to his knowledge. He needed a plan, not an emotional explosion. A profound sense of grief washed over him, a deep, silent mourning for the years he thought were real, for the love he had believed in. The Betty Jo he had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger. The thought of fighting back felt foreign, against his nature, but the alternative, losing everything, the Aspen property, his home, his dignity, ignited a cold, steady resolve within him. He would not go down without a fight. Hank met Martha, a seasoned, no-nonsense divorce attorney, in a discreet downtown office, emphasizing the need for absolute secrecy. Martha, after hearing his story and seeing his evidence, advised him on securing assets, documenting the fraud, and preparing for an emergency injunction. She introduced him to the concept of a forensic accountant to trace the labyrinth of Betty Jo's transfers. Hank spent evenings gathering all original financial documents from his files, old tax returns, mortgage papers, investment statements, making multiple copies. Leveraging his real estate network, he quietly arranged for a certified appraiser to assess their marital home's current market value without alerting Betty Jo. He set up a new encrypted email address and a burner phone, known only to Martha and Frank, to communicate securely. Betty Jo, seemingly oblivious to Hank's awakening, continued to push him about confirming his San Diego conference attendance. Hank played along, telling her he'd booked his flights and registered, even showing her a fake confirmation email he'd created. Working closely with Martha, they devised a precise timeline for the August weekend, planning his counterstrike. Their strategy involved filing an emergency court order to freeze all accounts and properties before Betty Jo and Mitch could finalize their transfers. The strain of maintaining his normal routine weighed heavily on Hank, but each small step towards justice fueled his determination. He snapped a discreet photo of Betty Jo and Mitch sharing a too intimate laugh at a company picnic, a silent piece of evidence. Martha's office was on the third floor of a brick building downtown, quiet and unassuming. She was a seasoned divorce attorney, her face lined with experience, her eyes sharp and direct. Hank laid out his story, the words feeling heavy and foreign as he spoke them aloud. He pushed across the table the thick envelope filled with printouts, the emails, the bank statements, the hidden journal entries. He emphasized the need for absolute secrecy. Martha listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding. After he finished, she leaned back, a thoughtful hum escaping her lips. "This is bad, Hank, but not impossible. Your evidence is strong. We need to secure your assets, fully document the fraud, and prepare for an emergency injunction." She explained the need for a forensic accountant, someone who could trace the labyrinth of Betty Jo's transfers, follow the money trail to the Cayman account. It was a cold, calculated world, and Martha was a skilled guide. In the evenings, after Betty Jo was asleep or engrossed in her phone, Hank became a silent archivist. He went through his old files, gathering every original financial document, old tax returns from their first year, mortgage papers, investment statements from before Betty Jo took control. He made multiple copies, storing them in a secure off-site location away from the house. He felt like a spy in his own home, each rustle of paper a potential giveaway. Leveraging his real estate network, he quietly arranged for a certified appraiser to assess their marital home's current market value. He explained it as future planning, a routine checkup for a potential refinance, without breathing a word about the true reason. The appraiser, a friend from years back, was discreet. Betty Jo remained oblivious. To communicate securely, Hank set up a new encrypted email address. He bought a cheap burner phone, the kind you could pick up at a convenience store, known only to Martha and Frank. The digital shadows were becoming his new reality. Betty Jo, for her part, remained oblivious to the storm brewing. She continued to push him about confirming his San Diego conference attendance. "Have you booked your flights, honey? It's coming up fast." Hank played along, confirming he'd booked his tickets and registered. He even showed her a fake confirmation email he'd painstakingly created, mirroring the Meridian Investments format. Her relief was palpable, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Working closely with Martha, they devised a precise timeline for the August weekend. Their strategy was clear: file an emergency court order to freeze all accounts and properties. This had to happen before Betty Jo and Mitch could finalize their transfers to the Cayman account and sign over the Aspen property. It would be a narrow window, a race against the clock. "Timing is everything, Hank," Martha had told him, her gaze unwavering. "We hit them when they least expect it, when they think they are home free." The strain of maintaining his normal routine, the forced smiles, the casual conversations, weighed heavily on Hank. He felt like he was performing a never-ending play, his real emotions locked away. Yet each small step he took, each document gathered, each conversation with Martha fueled a quiet determination. He was no longer just reacting. He was fighting back. At a company picnic a few days later, amidst the cheerful chatter and the smell of grilling burgers, Hank spotted Betty Jo and Mitch. They were standing by the dessert table, heads close, sharing a too intimate laugh. Hank discreetly pulled out his burner phone, pretending to check a text. He aimed the camera, snapped a quick photo, and tucked the phone away. Another piece of evidence, another silent confirmation of the life he was about to dismantle. You know, life often throws these curveballs, and sometimes the quietest battles are the ones that demand the most from you. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The final week before the San Diego conference passed with an eerie calm, Hank and Betty Jo maintaining their carefully constructed routine. Hank packed a small suitcase, making a show of preparing for his trip, but secretly booked a modest hotel room just outside Denver. On Thursday morning, Hank departed for the airport, sending Betty Jo a text from what she thought was the gate lounge. Instead of flying, he checked into his anonymous hotel, a quiet sentinel waiting for the hammer to fall. Friday morning, Betty Jo, emboldened by Hank's perceived absence, set her plan in motion, coordinating with Doris, initiating the final transfers to the Cayman account. Mitch was by her side, celebrating prematurely, envisioning their Bali escape. Meanwhile, Martha, Hank's attorney, filed the emergency injunction, complete with the irrefutable evidence of fraud and the intent to dissipate marital assets. Almost simultaneously, the bank accounts were frozen, the Aspen property transfer was red-flagged, and a lien was placed on the marital home. Betty Jo and Mitch's phones lit up with notifications from banks and legal offices. Their smug faces turned to expressions of shock and then furious disbelief. Betty Jo frantically called Doris, only to be informed that the legal action originated from Hank, not a client, and that her scheme was exposed. Mitch, his executive facade cracking, furiously accused Betty Jo of being sloppy and threatened to protect his own career, abandoning her. Alone in his hotel room, Hank received a brief, confirming call from Martha. A quiet, heavy victory, devoid of joy. The final week before the San Diego conference passed with an eerie calm. Hank and Betty Jo moved through their days, a carefully constructed routine of morning coffee, work, and polite evening conversation. He continued to play the part of the unsuspecting husband, nodding at her plans for the house, listening to her talk about Mitch's latest business strategies. Inside, a quiet tension coiled. Hank packed a small suitcase on Wednesday night, making a show of laying out clothes for his trip. He told Betty Jo he'd booked an early morning flight, but instead of an airport hotel, he'd secretly reserved a modest room at a nondescript chain hotel just outside Denver, a place no one would think to look. On Thursday morning, Hank departed for the airport. He drove the long way around, pulling into a parking lot near DI. From there, he sent Betty Jo a text. "Just boarded, honey. See you Sunday. Miss you already." He waited a few minutes, then drove back towards the city, checking into his anonymous hotel room. He closed the door, the cheap lock clicking shut, and sat on the edge of the bed, a quiet sentinel waiting for the hammer to fall. Friday morning dawned. Hank imagined Betty Jo, emboldened by his perceived absence, setting her plan in motion. He pictured her on the phone coordinating with Doris, initiating the final irreversible transfers to the Cayman account. Mitch, no doubt, was by her side, celebrating prematurely, envisioning their Bali escape, a future built on his ruin. Hank looked out the window at the bland corporate park, the gray sky, and felt a cold, hard knot in his stomach. Back in downtown Denver, Martha, Hank's attorney, moved with precise timing. She filed the emergency injunction, a thick stack of papers detailing the irrefutable evidence of fraud, the emails, the bank statements, the photographic evidence of their affair, the carefully documented timeline. The intent to dissipate marital assets was crystal clear. Almost simultaneously, the digital gates slammed shut. The bank accounts, both joint and Betty Jo's personal one, were frozen. The Aspen property transfer, poised for its final signature, was red-flagged and put on immediate hold. A lien was placed on the marital home, preventing any sale or transfer. The meticulously planned heist had hit an invisible wall. Betty Jo and Mitch's phones, wherever they were, undoubtedly lit up with a barrage of notifications. Emails from banks, legal documents from the courts, alerts from their financial institutions. Hank pictured their smug faces, slowly turning to expressions of shock, then disbelief, then furious panic. The Bali dreams, crumbling into dust. Betty Jo, frantic, would have called Doris, the attorney she thought was her attorney. But Doris Lang, Hank now knew, worked for him, or at least had been strategically identified by Frank as a capable, discreet lawyer. The conversation would be brief, brutal. Doris would inform Betty Jo that the legal action originated from Hank, not some unknown party, and that her scheme was exposed. The carefully constructed facade of her betrayal shattered. Mitch, the sleek executive, would have watched his carefully cultivated career begin to unravel. His executive facade, so polished and impenetrable, would have cracked, revealing the panicked man beneath. Hank could almost hear Mitch's furious accusations, blaming Betty Jo for being sloppy, threatening to protect his own career, abandoning her just as quickly as he'd charmed her. Loyalty, in their world, was a commodity. Alone in his hotel room, the air thick with unspoken tension, Hank's burner phone vibrated. It was Martha. Her voice was calm, professional. "It's done, Hank. All assets frozen. The transfers were stopped. They're aware." A quiet, heavy victory settled over him. It was devoid of joy, certainly, but it was a victory nonetheless. He had fought back. He had dismantled their plans. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic. He was alone, but no longer a puppet. Hank returned home late Saturday evening, finding the house in disarray, Betty Jo pacing wildly, her phone ringing unanswered. "What did you do, Hank?" she shrieked, her voice raw, finally shattering the fragile peace between them. Hank, calm and collected, laid out his evidence, recounting the overheard conversation, the emails, the bank transfers, the name of the Cayman account. Betty Jo cycled through denial, then anger, then a desperate attempt to justify her actions. "It was for us. You weren't ambitious enough, Hank." Hank simply pointed to the drained savings, the Aspen dream. "You emptied us out, Betty Jo. You stole our future." Mitch called Betty Jo, his voice cold and final, cutting ties completely. He stated his firm was investigating, and he was clearing his name. "You're on your own, Betty Jo." The realization hit Betty Jo hard. Her career was over, her partner in crime had abandoned her, and she faced legal repercussions beyond divorce. Hank quietly gathered a few essentials and left the marital home, finding temporary lodging, formally initiating separation and divorce proceedings. The divorce began, but now Hank held the advantage, his meticulous evidence dismantling Betty Jo's case. Dale and Brenda, having heard the inevitable whispers through the small-town grapevine, reached out, offering quiet, steadfast support to Hank. Hank felt no triumph, only a profound exhaustion and a deep, aching sadness for the life he had built and believed in. Hank returned home late Saturday evening. The quiet hotel room had given him time to think, to steel himself. He let himself in with his key, the familiar click echoing in the silent house. He found the living room in disarray, pillows askew on the couch, a half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, Betty Jo's phone lying face down, vibrating periodically with unanswered calls. She was pacing wildly between the kitchen and the living room, her usually pristine hair disheveled, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. She spun around as he stepped into the light, her eyes, wide and bloodshot, fixed on him. "What did you do, Hank?" she shrieked, her voice raw, stripped of its usual composure. The question hung in the air, finally shattering the fragile peace that had masqueraded as their marriage. Hank remained calm, his voice steady, almost detached. "I know everything, Betty Jo." He walked to the dining room table, pulling out a chair. He laid out the neatly organized stack of evidence he'd brought from Martha's office. Printouts of her emails with Mitch, copies of the bank statements showing the large periodic transfers, the detailed timeline from his journal. "I overheard you and Mitch on the patio that night at the gala. I need him gone by August. He'll never know what hit him." He recounted the conversation in stark, factual detail, every chilling word, every whispered plan. The San Diego conference, the final transfer to the Cayman account, your attorney, Doris Lang, or SL as you called her, the Aspen property. It was all there. Betty Jo cycled through a rapid succession of emotions. First, denial, a desperate, breathless, "No, that's not true." Then anger, her face contorting. "How dare you, snooping through my private things?" Finally, a desperate attempt to justify her actions, her voice rising in pitch. "It was for us, Hank. You weren't ambitious enough. You were holding us back. We needed more. A better life." Hank looked at her, his expression unwavering. "You emptied us out, Betty Jo. You stole our future, our retirement, the Aspen dream. That was our money, not just yours." He gestured to the bank statements, the numbers stark and undeniable. Just then, Betty Jo's phone rang again. She snatched it up, looking at the caller ID, then hesitated. It rang once more. She answered, putting it on speaker without thinking. It was Mitch. His voice was cold, clipped, entirely devoid of the charm he usually possessed. "Betty Jo, I've just been informed by our legal department that Meridian Investments is launching an internal investigation. My career is on the line. I'm clearing my name. This is over. You're on your own." The line went dead. The realization hit Betty Jo hard. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. Her career was over. Her partner in crime had abandoned her, and she now faced not just a messy divorce, but potentially severe legal repercussions for corporate fraud and theft. The ambitious, calculating woman in front of him visibly crumbled. Hank quietly went upstairs. He packed another small bag with a few essentials: clothes, his old college photos, the book he'd been reading. He left the marital home, driving to the temporary lodging Martha had arranged, a small apartment across town. He had formally initiated separation and divorce proceedings that morning. The divorce began, but now Hank held every advantage. His meticulous evidence dismantled Betty Jo's case before it even began. The financial fraud was clear, the intent to dissipate assets undeniable. Through the small-town grapevine, Dale and Brenda had heard the inevitable whispers. They reached out, not with judgment, but with quiet, steadfast support. "You just let us know what you need, Hank," Dale had said, his voice gruff but kind. Brenda simply squeezed his hand. Hank felt no triumph, no elation. Only a profound exhaustion settled deep in his bones, and a deep, aching sadness for the life he had built, the love he had believed in. The silence in the temporary apartment was vast, empty. Months turned into a year. The divorce was messy, protracted, but Hank's irrefutable evidence ensured a favorable settlement, protecting what little Betty Jo hadn't tried to steal. Betty Jo's career at Meridian Investments collapsed. She was forced to take a low-paying, anonymous job in a different town, her reputation irrevocably stained. Mitch managed to largely distance himself, though his name was whispered in certain circles, his executive shine dulled by the scandal. Hank sold the marital home, a place now haunted by ghosts of betrayal, using his share to buy a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town. He spent evenings reflecting on the insidious nature of greed and deceit, how it can slowly, silently poison a life from within. His trust in others was deeply damaged, making new relationships, even friendships, feel like walking on thin ice. He found solace in his work, the simple, honest act of helping people find homes, a stark contrast to the betrayal he experienced. Hank eventually visited the Aspen property site, the dream now a distant memory, realizing the true value wasn't in the place, but the life he'd imagined sharing there. He reconnected with old hobbies, fishing on lonely lakes, tinkering with an old truck in his new garage, finding a quiet, predictable rhythm. The scar of betrayal remained, a permanent mark, but Hank was no longer defined solely by it. He was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. He occasionally saw Betty Jo from afar in town, her once vibrant presence diminished, burdened. There was no joy in his observation, just a somber recognition of the heavy price paid. Life in the Midwest continued, slow and steady, but Hank's perspective was forever changed, forever seasoned by the quiet heartbreak that had been his marriage. Months turned into a year. The divorce was messy, protracted, exactly as Martha had predicted. Betty Jo fought, of course, denying the fraud, attempting to paint Hank as controlling, but his irrefutable evidence, the emails, the bank records, the meticulous journal entries, ensured a favorable settlement. He managed to protect what little Betty Jo hadn't tried to steal, including a portion of their initial investment in the Aspen property, frozen just in time. Betty Jo's career at Meridian Investments collapsed. The internal investigation, sparked by Mitch's frantic efforts to distance himself, unearthed enough irregularities to ensure her dismissal. She was forced to take a low-paying, anonymous job in a different town, her once stellar reputation irrevocably stained, confined to the shadows. Mitch, ever the survivor, managed to largely distance himself from the worst of the scandal, though his name was whispered in certain circles. His executive shine, once so bright, was irrevocably dulled. Hank sold the marital home, the house that now felt haunted by ghosts of betrayal and carefully constructed lies. It wasn't a quick sale. The market was slow, but he needed to sever that last tie. He used his share to buy a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town, a modest bungalow with a big backyard, a place he could truly call his own, unburdened by past memories. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection. He often sat on his new porch, watching the sunset, thinking about the insidious nature of greed and deceit, how it could slowly, silently poison a life from within, eroding trust until nothing remained. His own trust in others was deeply damaged. New relationships, even casual friendships, felt like walking on thin ice. Every friendly gesture now scrutinized for ulterior motives. He found solace in his work, the simple, honest act of helping people find homes, guiding them through the process, felt like a grounding force. It was a stark contrast to the betrayal he had experienced, a world where transactions were transparent and expectations were clear. He eventually drove to the Aspen property site, the land he and Betty Jo had dreamed of building a life on. The dream was now a distant memory, the vision of a cabin by the lake replaced by a quiet understanding. He realized the true value wasn't in the place itself, but in the life he'd imagined sharing there, the future he'd believed in. That was what had been lost more than any acreage. He reconnected with old hobbies, finding comfort in their predictability, fishing on lonely lakes, the quiet rhythm of casting and reeling, the solitude a welcome balm. Tinkering with an old Ford truck in his new garage, the methodical work of restoring something broken, bringing it back to life. He found a quiet, predictable rhythm in these simple acts, a way to anchor himself in the present. The scar of betrayal remained, a permanent mark, a deep groove etched into his life. But Hank was no longer defined solely by it. He was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. He occasionally saw Betty Jo from afar in town, a fleeting glimpse of her in a grocery store aisle or a gas station. Her once vibrant, ambitious presence was now diminished, her shoulders stooped, burdened by the choices she'd made. There was no joy in his observation, no satisfaction in her downfall, just a somber recognition of the heavy price paid by everyone involved. Life in the Midwest continued, slow and steady, but Hank's perspective was forever changed, forever seasoned by the quiet heartbreak that had been his marriage. The shattered remnants of Hank's life lay scattered, much like the fragments of glass from a dropped champagne flute. He stood amidst the debris, not broken, but remade into something harder, quieter. The betrayal had stripped away his naivete, leaving behind a man who understood the cold calculus of deceit. He had navigated the legal labyrinth, salvaged what he could, and now he walked a different path. The pain remained, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer defined him. He had learned that quiet observation could be a weapon, and silence a shield. Life, he found, did not offer grand finales, only continuous shifts, like the plains went across a field. The sun still rose, the seasons still turned, and in the heartland, people just kept going, one careful step after another. He would too.